If you could switch bodies with someone for a day, what would you do? And let's say you could switch back after 12 hours, I asked my friend Lydia over lunch. Lydia and I had been close friends for years. I met her and her husband Bernie when they moved into the apartment next door, and we hit it off right away. Lydia was stunning. Petite, standing around 5'3", with a toned, athletic body. Her blonde hair fell to her shoulders, and her blue eyes sparkled. I always thought her figure was perfect for her size. And even though we were friends, I couldn't help but notice how great she looked. We were such good friends that she even told me when she found out she was pregnant, before Bernie. They now had an adorable daughter, Grace, who was already 4. I felt sad when they moved into a house, but we kept in touch with lunch dates and occasional barbecues. Where would their mind be? She asked. Inside your body. Oh, that's interesting. I guess it depends on who I'd be switching with, she replied thoughtfully. Okay, let's say we switched for 12 hours. Well, if I were you, I think it'd be fun to experience being tall and being male for a day. I laughed. I was 6'3", so I always felt like I towered over her. Being tall is fun, but wouldn't you want to do something or go somewhere? I asked. I guess, but it'd be tough to figure out what to do as, not me, she said, lost in thought. You could visit places and see what it's like to experience them from someone else's perspective. True, but what if I ran into someone you know? It'd be weird to try to act normal, she mused. Well, you could either pretend to be me, or tell someone who you really are, I suggested. She laughed. That would be hilarious. She seemed to be deep in thought, so I decided to nudge the conversation along. If I were you, I know what I'd do. What's that? I'd visit the gym or maybe a bar, just to see how people treat you differently. That sounds fun, she said with a grin. It'd be interesting to see you go to a bar as me. Why? What typically happens at a bar? I asked. Well, if you went by yourself and dressed well, you'd probably get a lot more attention than usual. I'm sure I would, I said, smiling. Lydia had worked hard after having Grace to get back into shape. And you'd probably feel weird because it'd be a whole different kind of attention. No doubt, I replied. You'd get a sense of what it's like from a woman's perspective. It can be a little overwhelming at times. Would you go to a bar as a guy? Maybe. I bet that'd be a totally different experience too. Not so overwhelming, but definitely not exciting, I said. I could tell she was losing interest, so I added, I might try a dance club, but that would probably be too strange. She burst out laughing. That would be hilarious, unless you went with a group of girls. Or a guy. She winked. Club guys can be pretty aggressive if you're on your own. I can imagine, I said. And if we switched, I'd be freaked out by Bernie and Grace. I wouldn't know what to do if they were around. Yeah, Grace would be chattering nonstop, expecting you to know all our routines. And Bernie, well, you could talk to him, but you'd probably feel uncomfortable with him being too familiar, she replied. That would be awkward. I'd probably just stand there in shock and try not to overreact. It's funny to think about how someone would perceive your life if they suddenly found themselves in your body, she said. Since I live alone, you could pretty much do whatever you wanted. Yeah, it'd probably be easier for me to pass as you than the other way around, especially with Bernie. She laughed. Imagine waking up next to him, and he's all ready to go. It would be the ultimate experience for you. Well, I'd, probably run and hide, or pretend to be sick. But I guess trying to avoid him wouldn't be great when we switched back. How would you feel if a girl ran out of bed to avoid you? She teased. Well, I won't need to worry about that, I said. Yeah, too bad we can't actually switch bodies, she responded, thinking it over. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the reason I had started this whole conversation. What if I told you we actually could? Would you be willing to do it? I asked. What do you mean? She replied, curious. Would you be willing to switch bodies for 12 hours or more? To see what it's like to be male, while I experience what it's like to be female? You'd be me, and I'd be you. Are you serious? She asked, skeptical. Remember my Uncle Frank who passed away a few months ago? He left me something, an artifact and a letter explaining how it works. According to the letter, it allows a man and a woman to switch bodies. It sounds crazy, but I really want to try it, and who better than one of my closest friends? Are you messing with me? Nope, I said. But we couldn't switch back for 12 hours. Otherwise, I'd say let's do it right now. Okay, Lydia said with determination. I'm willing to give it a try, when? I could hardly believe she agreed, and I just sat there for a moment, processing. Well, we'll need a day off from work. And since I'll be you, it has to be when Bernie and Grace aren't around, I said, adding, that way, I can go out and do whatever I want as you. You don't want Bernie to know we're switching? She asked. Not really. It'd be too weird if he knew, especially if it doesn't even work. Well, if that's all, how about this Friday? Bernie's going to his mom's place and taking Grace with him. I'm not going because of some tension with his mom. I already have the day off, and I was planning to clean, but I don't really have to. If you can get the day off too, we could switch in the morning and switch back in the evening or even wait until Saturday afternoon. Bernie and Grace won't be home until Sunday afternoon, so it's perfect. I'm sure I can get it off, I said. That sounds perfect. We'll spend the whole day as each other. I can't wait till Friday. The days leading up to Friday felt long. Time seemed to drag on, but I couldn't stop thinking about all the things I would do while in Lydia's body. I had some ideas from our conversation, maybe hit the gym. I also wanted to go shopping, check out some things at Victoria's Secret. That sounded like a lot of fun. Finally, Friday arrived. Lydia showed up at my place at 8 in the morning. I hadn't slept well, so I was already up and ready. Open the door, it's freezing out here, she said, rushing inside. She was wearing a cute floral sundress that hugged her figure and showed a little cleavage. You should have dressed warmer, I said, eyeing her outfit. It's supposed to rain today. I didn't know that. It just started sprinkling when I got here. But if this works, you can go back to my place and change into whatever you want. Yeah, I thought the same for you, I replied, as I was just wearing a t-shirt and jeans. So, where is this thing? She asked, looking around. Right here, I said, walking her over to my kitchen table. On the table lay a stone tablet about the size of a large dinner plate. It had a yin/yang symbol, but it looked ancient. According to the letter, the man would sit on one side, place his palm on the black circle, and the woman would sit on the other, placing her hand on the white circle. The letter explained that the change could only happen between a man and a woman, and we couldn't switch back for at least 12 hours. Well, it doesn't look like much, she said, sitting down and placing her hand on the white circle. I just put my hand here. Are you ready to try it? I asked, feeling a bit nervous. If it works, we'll have an adventure. If not, we'll just laugh it off and watch a movie, she said. Okay. I sat across from Lydia and placed my hand on the black circle. Close your eyes and relax, I said, closing my own eyes. I was waiting for any strange sensations when suddenly I felt a chill. Wow, it's cold in here, I said, and then my eyes snapped open at the sound of my own voice. Even though I thought it would work, I was still stunned to see my own body sitting across from me. Dan? Is that you? My body asked, staring at me. Oh my God, it really worked. Then he quickly jumped up and rushed to the bathroom mirror. Oh my God, it did work, I said, looking down at my new body. I could feel the light fabric of the sundress against my skin, and an unfamiliar sensation made me realize I was wearing a bra. Slowly, I touched one of my chest and confirmed that they felt real. Wow, I murmured, standing up to follow Lydia into the bathroom. When I entered, I was momentarily taken aback by how large my real body now seemed. Being 6 feet 3 inches, I'm used to running into people who are a little taller than me, but never someone a foot taller. Now, looking at my old body, it felt strange. Lydia seemed a foot taller than me, and everything else felt larger too. I looked at myself from a new perspective. I was 6 feet 3 inches, about 190 pounds, in good shape, with brown hair and green eyes. Then, I caught a glimpse of my own reflection, or rather, Lydia's reflection, staring back at me. It was surreal. My body was standing right next to me, towering over me, but it wasn't controlled by me anymore. Instead, the blonde beside me was now me. It was weird. "This is so strange, Lydia," I said, still staring up at my old body. "I know. This is unreal," she replied, glancing down at me. "But I guess I'm Dan now, and you're Lydia. At least for the next 12 hours. "This is so cool," I said finally. "Now that I'm in your body, I don't even want to go out and do anything today. I just want to stay here and look at myself." "Great idea. I think I'll stay in too and see what it's like to be you," Lydia said, walking out of the bathroom. "Be sure to drive safely though. Don't want you wrecking my car." "Oh, right," I said, realizing this wasn't my apartment anymore. Lydia and I chatted for a bit, but it felt strange seeing someone else moving my body. Watching it move without my control was starting to make me anxious. Eventually, I decided to leave when Lydia, now in my body, started casually walking around topless. It wasn't the topless part that bothered me, but the fact that she kept reflexively covering her chest. It was getting on my nerves. I hurried outside, racing into the rain to find Lydia's car. I really should have asked her where she parked it, because by the time I found it, I was completely drenched. I slid into the driver's seat of the 1998 Toyota Tercel and shivered. The car was a bit of a mess. In the back, there was a child's car seat, toys scattered around, papers, juice boxes, a bottle of water, and one of Grace's sweaters. I grabbed some napkins and wiped the rain off my face. "Well, here goes the adventure," I said, starting the car. My left foot instinctively reached for the clutch, but I realized Lydia's car was automatic. "How fancy," I said, beginning the drive toward Lydia's house. I parked in her garage and walked into the house. It was a cozy starter home, and Lydia and Bernie had clearly put a lot of effort into making it beautiful. They had renovated the kitchen, updated the bathrooms with marble countertops, repainted the entire place, and installed new carpet. It truly was a lovely home. I looked out the front window. Now the rain was pouring down. I was a little disappointed by the miserable weather, but since I planned to stay in until it was time to switch back, it didn't matter much. Soaked from the rain, I decided to change into dry clothes. I also wanted to see what Lydia's body looked like without clothes. By this point, she had already seen what I looked like, and aside from a quick glance at the red lights on the way here, I hadn't really had a chance to see much of her. I quickly unbuttoned the sundress and let it fall to the floor. Standing in front of the mirror, I looked at Lydia's body, now in just a bra and panties. "Well, that's interesting," I muttered, as I started to slide the bra down to get a better look. That's when I heard the sound of the door from the garage opening and closing. "Lydia!" I heard Bernie's voice call out. "Lydia, honey. We're back." "Oh no!" I thought, panicking as I quickly fixed my bra and scrambled to find something to wear. I grabbed a pair of jeans and hurriedly put them on. "Mommy! Mommy!" Grace shouted, and I heard her running down the hallway. "Oh no!" I muttered under my breath as I grabbed a t-shirt and pulled it on. It was a cute blue shirt that fit the curves of my body perfectly, but I couldn't appreciate it at that moment. Just as I finished pulling it on, Grace came bounding into the room, threw her arms around my legs, and hugged them tightly. "Mommy!" I was so scared. Grace exclaimed. She was the cutest 4-year-old blonde girl you could imagine, with her father's brown eyes but her mother's facial features. She was thin, energetic, and incredibly sharp. I didn't know what to do. Grace thought I was her mom, but I wasn't. She wasn't supposed to be here. I had spent time at their house before, playing with Grace, but now I felt out of place. There, sweetie, I said, trying to comfort her as best I could. I knelt down and hugged her. Everything is going to be okay. The rain was so heavy, I decided to turn back and visit Mom some other time, Bernie said, walking into the bedroom. He was about my normal height, so now he stood a foot taller than me. He was blonde, had brown eyes, and was in excellent shape, being a triathlete. The roads are a mess. Plus, Grace wanted to make sure her mommy was okay, right, Grace? Yes, Daddy, Grace responded, then threw her arms tightly around my neck and hugged me with all her strength. I missed my mommy, she said, giving me a kiss on the cheek. As strange as it was, my first instinct was to run away. I had to get out of there before they figured out who I really was. They probably wouldn't suspect anything, after all, I was in Lydia's body, but I still felt like an intruder and just wanted to escape before I was found out. I could already tell that something felt off. Ah, Bernie said, squatting down to hug both of us in his strong arms. That's my girls, he said, kissing Grace's forehead and then mine. I sat there in stunned silence, not knowing what to say or do. Mommy, you know what you always need to watch out for? Grace asked, her face lighting up with a mischievous grin. What's that? I said, still reeling from the fact that Bernie had just kissed my head, but trying to keep up the act as Lydia. What is it, Grace? The tickle monster, she squealed, and immediately started trying to tickle my sides. I instinctively cut her hands, holding onto her, when suddenly my body went into uncontrollable spasms, and I let out a surprised shriek. And the father of the tickle monster, Bernie said, joining in by tickling my sides with an expert touch. I couldn't resist, my grip on Grace's arm slipped, and I was soon thrashing around on the floor, laughing uncontrollably as I gasped for breath. Mommy, I'll save you, Grace said, giggling. She tried her best to help, but within seconds, she was beside me, and we were both laughing helplessly under Bernie's relentless tickling. Daddy, I need to use the potty, Grace yelled, and Bernie stopped tickling her. She quickly ran out of the room. I was gasping for air, grateful that the tickling had stopped, but then it started up again. I squealed in surprise as my body went wild, trying to escape Bernie's grasp. The tickling stopped again, and I sighed with relief for a moment. But that peace didn't last long when I realized that Bernie's hands, which had been on my sides, had moved to my chest. Oh, I said, surprised by the sensation. It felt strange but also pleasant. I'll put a DVD on for Grace, and we can have some alone time, Bernie said, giving me a look I couldn't quite interpret. I was completely stunned. He wanted to be intimate with me, well, with his wife, who I appeared to be at that moment. The thought hit me like a bucket of cold water. I couldn't let that happen, but I had no idea what to do. Before I could come up with an excuse, the phone rang, and Bernie got up to answer it. Hello, he answered. Oh, hi Marcia. Yeah, she's right here, he said, handing me the phone. Who is Marcia? I thought as Bernie handed me the phone. Hello? I said, nervously. Oh, Lydia, thank God you're home, the woman said urgently. Brenda's car broke down, and Debbie's sick. Is there any way you can come into work today? Oh no, I thought, as I realized Lydia worked at a daycare center nearby. My first instinct was to refuse, but the fear of Bernie's advances made me say yes. Oh, Lydia, you're a lifesaver, Marcia said as she hung up. Bernie seemed disappointed but understood why I had to go to work. Grace, of course, wanted to come with me, but Bernie said he'd watch her since they were short-staffed. I thought that was pretty considerate of him. Grace, on the other hand, started crying because she wanted to stay with her mom. After promising her a fun time with popcorn and a DVD in a blanket fort, Grace finally let me leave. The rain was still pouring, but I had a jacket and umbrella now. On the drive to work, I called my home number, waiting for the beep of the answering machine. "Hello, Lydia." "Pick up the phone, it's me," I said. "Hello," I heard my male voice say. "You wouldn't believe all the things I've been doing. Peeing standing up is awesome, and I dash." "Bernie and Grace came home," I interrupted. "Oh, boy," Lydia said. "Bernie started tickling me, then wanted to get physical," I explained. "Oh, God." "And then work called, and I managed to avoid Bernie by going into your job." "Oh, geez," Lydia replied, then added after a brief silence, "You probably should have just gone along with it." "Very funny," I said. "I haven't had a chance to do anything I planned as you. I've been going nonstop since I left, and I haven't even gotten to try on your top yet." Lydia laughed. "Well, I got to see what all the fuss was about, if you know what I mean." "What do you mean?" I asked, pulling into the daycare parking lot. "I had an orgasm," she said, somewhat embarrassed. "It's always messy, right?" "You, already?" I said, feeling a bit jealous. "I want to try one." "Well, you can have the real thing tonight when you go home. Bernie will still be up for it." "Yuck." "No way," I said, disgusted. "How about we switch back at 8 tonight, and we'll switch again another day when I have some privacy?" "Sounds like a plan," Lydia said. "Well, I'm at your work, so I'd better get going." "Wait, don't forget to take some of the chocolate cookies home for Grace. She can't have any until after dinner, though." "Okay, you got it," I said. "See you at 8. After a chaotic 15 minutes at Lydia's job, I came to a startling realization: Lydia was right. I should have just stayed home with Bernie. My senses were completely overwhelmed by the 24 or so kids screaming and running around the room. Finally, Marcia and I, mostly Marcia, got them under control and working on various projects. My biggest challenge was that all the kids knew Lydia, but I didn't know their names. I had to fake it for a while until I could get a handle on most of their names. I was sitting with a group of girls coloring My Little Pony pictures when a little boy named Brad handed me a dinosaur picture he had colored red with a big heart on it. "Lydia, I drew this for you," Brad said, then ran across the room, hiding his face in his hands, embarrassed. Shortly after that, I had to break up a fight between two boys over a toy car. Then, I had a hula hoop contest with some of the older girls. I was never great at it, but thanks to my new thinner waist and rounder hips, I did okay, though I let a 5-year-old girl win in the end. I suddenly realized I needed to use the restroom. After the whirlwind of activity since I arrived, I looked in the mirror and noticed a smudge of blue paint across my forehead from helping a little boy, Rick, paint a picture of the sky. I must have wiped it there without thinking. Using the bathroom was a new experience. I reflexively stood in front of the toilet, lifted the lid, and unzipped, only to reach for something that wasn't there. It was a little surprising, but almost amusing how automatic our routines become. I didn't even think to sit down. As I sat there, I looked at my chest and gave them a quick squeeze to confirm they were real. I had considered taking off my shirt and looking at them more closely, but I couldn't bring myself to do it right then. I was at a daycare, for heaven's sake. After cleaning up, I returned to the play area, just in time for lunch. "Lydia! Sit with me," a girl named Marcy called. "She sat with you yesterday." "Sit here," another girl, Michelle, chimed in. Since we were short-staffed, I didn't even get a chance to sit down until nap time, when the kids finally drifted off to sleep. The rain had stopped, but dark clouds were gathering in the distance, and the weather report said more rain was coming. Finally, I got a brief moment to relax, at least until the kids woke up. I grabbed a cold pizza slice left over from lunch and washed it down with a box of grape juicy juice. This day was nothing like I had imagined. I had planned to go shopping, maybe try on some clothes, and have fun exploring Lydia's body. But instead, I was stuck here, waiting to switch back in under 8 hours. The kids began waking from their naps, and I braced myself for another round of chaos. But to my surprise, it was DVD time. Marcia put on Sleeping Beauty, and most of the kids were glued to the screen for the entire movie. The rest of the day seemed to fly by. Soon, parents started arriving to pick up their kids. It was close to 6 o'clock when Marcia walked over to me. "Thank you so much, Lydia. You're a real lifesaver," she said, looking exhausted. "Glad I could help," I replied, wrapping myself in Lydia's jacket and heading toward her car. I made it halfway there before turning around and going back inside. "Forget something?" Marcia asked. "Cookies for Grace," I said, grabbing a box of chocolate chip cookies and slipping them into my jacket pocket. "See you Monday," Marcia said. "Thanks again." "You're welcome," I replied, noticing the rain starting again. It was only 6 o'clock, and I had a couple of hours to kill. I had no real plans, so I started the car and drove toward home. The roads were getting a little flooded as I pulled into the garage at Lydia and Bernie's place. I had hoped to go back to my own apartment and wait until 8 to switch back, but I knew the real Lydia would be home, so I had no choice but to keep playing the part until then and make an excuse to go out later. "Mommy, Mommy!" Grace screamed as I entered through the connecting door from the garage. "Dinner's almost ready." I knelt down and hugged her tightly. "How's my little angel today?" I said, recalling how Lydia often greeted Grace. Her face lit up as she threw her arms around me. "Did you bring me anything?" she asked eagerly. "Oh," I said, making a sad face. Grace looked a little disappointed, but then I pulled the box of cookies from my jacket and tapped her playfully on the head with it. Her eyes lit up with joy as she reached for the box. "Mommy, you tricked me," she giggled, then grabbed the cookies. "Not until after dinner," I said, and Grace pouted. I kissed her cheek and headed toward the kitchen, the delicious smell of dinner making my stomach growl. "Hi, Hon, how was work?" Bernie asked as he stirred something in a large frying pan. I hung my jacket over a chair. "Not too bad, but it was a long day," I replied, and before I knew it, Bernie leaned over and gave me a quick kiss on the lips. I froze for a second, surprised by the kiss. I had to remind myself that I was still Lydia and not panic. "Can I have a cookie before dinner?" Grace asked longingly. "You can have some after dinner," I said, placing the cookies on top of the refrigerator. "Go wash up, dinner's ready," Bernie said. I helped Grace wash her hands, and we sat down at the table. The meal was amazing: sweet and sour chicken, fried rice, homemade wontons, and egg rolls. Delicious. After dinner, I cleared the table while Bernie and Grace started building a fort out of blankets for movie time. I could hear Bernie moving the couch to make extra space. I quickly started doing the dishes and glanced at the clock. It was barely 7 o'clock. I planned to watch part of the movie and then make an excuse to go out so I could switch back with Lydia. But I was so caught up in thoughts about the most believable excuse when I felt a pair of hands on my chest. I tensed, shocked by Bernie's touch, and had to remind myself to stay in character as Lydia. I suddenly realized I needed to use the restroom. After the hectic day, I looked into the mirror and noticed a streak of blue paint across my forehead from when I had been helping a little boy named Rick paint the sky. I must have absent-mindedly wiped my hand across my forehead without realizing it. Using the restroom was a bit strange. I instinctively stood in front of the toilet, lifted the lid, and started to unzip, only to reach for something that wasn't there. It was a bit jarring, but it made me realize just how routine our daily habits are. I hadn't even thought about sitting down. As I sat, I absent-mindedly glanced at my reflection and was reminded of the body I was in. I didn't want to focus on that, so I quickly finished up, then headed back out to the play area to see that it was time for lunch. "Lydia! Sit with me," a girl named Marcy called. "She sat with you yesterday." "Sit here," another girl, Michelle, said. Since we were short-handed, I didn't even get a chance to sit down until the kids finally settled down for their naps. Thankfully, the rain had stopped, but the sky still looked threatening, and the forecast predicted more rain later on. For a brief moment, I got to relax, at least until the kids woke up. I grabbed a leftover slice of cold pizza from the lunch leftovers and washed it down with some grape juice. This day was nothing like I had planned. I thought I'd be out shopping or having some fun with Lydia's body, but instead, I was stuck here, waiting to switch back in less than 8 hours. As the kids began waking up from their naps, I braced myself for the chaos to start again. But to my relief, Marcia decided to put in a DVD, Sleeping Beauty, and most of the kids were quiet and glued to the screen for the duration of the movie. The rest of the day seemed to fly by. Soon, the parents began arriving to pick up their kids. By 6 p.m., Marcia came over to me, looking drained. "Thank you so much, Lydia. You're a real lifesaver," she said. "Glad I could help," I replied, wrapping Lydia's jacket around me and heading toward the door. I got halfway to the car, but then turned around and went back inside. "Forget something?" Marcia called. "Cookies for Grace," I said, grabbing the box of cookies from the counter and slipping it into my jacket pocket. "See you Monday," Marcia said. "Thanks again." "You're welcome," I replied, noticing the rain starting to fall again. It was only 6 o'clock, and I had 2 hours to kill. With no real plans, I started the car and drove toward home. The roads were starting to flood as I pulled into the garage at Lydia and Bernie's place. I had wanted to go back to my own apartment and wait until 8 to switch back, but since Lydia would have already gone home, I knew I had no choice but to keep playing the role of Lydia until it was time to switch. "Mommy, Mommy!" Grace called as I entered from the garage. "Dinner's almost ready." I knelt down and gave Grace a tight hug. "How's my little angel today?" I said, recalling how Lydia would greet her. Her face lit up, and she immediately threw her arms around me again. "Did you bring me anything?" she asked eagerly. I pulled the box of cookies from my jacket pocket and tapped her on the head with it playfully. Her eyes lit up with excitement. "Mommy, you tricked me," she said, giggling, as she reached for the box. "Not until after dinner," I replied, and Grace pouted. I gave her a quick kiss on the cheek before heading toward the kitchen, where the smell of dinner made my stomach rumble. "Hi, Hon, how is work?" Bernie asked from the kitchen, stirring something in a pan. I hung my jacket over a chair. "Not too bad, but it was a long day," I replied. Before I could react, Bernie leaned over and gave me a quick kiss on the lips. I froze for a moment, surprised. I had to remind myself to stay in character as Lydia. "Can I have a cookie before dinner?" Grace asked, her eyes wide with hope. "You can have some after dinner," I said, placing the cookies on top of the refrigerator. "Go wash up, dinner's ready," Bernie said. I took Grace into the bathroom to wash her hands, and we sat down at the table. The meal was delicious: sweet and sour chicken, fried rice, homemade wontons, and egg rolls. It was perfect. After dinner, I cleared the table while Bernie and Grace set up a blanket fort in the living room. I started doing the dishes, glancing at the clock. It was barely 7 p.m. I planned to watch part of the movie with them, then make up an excuse to leave so I could switch back. But just as I was lost in thought about how to handle the situation, I felt a strange pressure on my chest. I froze as I realized what was happening. Bernie's hands had found their way to my chest. I quickly reminded myself to stay calm and keep playing the role of Lydia. Once Bernie was ready, I slipped on my shoes, grabbed my jacket, and we headed out. The rain was coming down hard again as we made our way to the hospital. Thick sheets of rain pounded against the windshield, and the wipers swished them away. I sat in the back seat next to Grace, who was strapped into her car seat. I did my best to comfort her, but she sobbed all the way there. At the hospital, we were quickly admitted and were waiting to see a doctor when Lydia's phone rang. I glanced at the caller ID and saw my own number. Grace, now more frightened of the hospital than her injury, was sitting quietly with Bernie. I took the chance to step a few feet away. "Hello?" I whispered. "Dan? Where are you?" "It's after 9, I heard my usual voice. "I'm at the hospital." Grace fell in. What? Oh my God! What happened? Lydia asked urgently. Grace was climbing to reach something and fell. She cut her chin open. We're waiting for the doctor to give her stitches. Stitches! Oh my God! Lydia responded frantically. I'll be right there. Lydia, just stay at my place. Grace is fine. We'll switch back later, and you can see her then. I need to be with my daughter. I'll bring the tablet, and we can switch in the hospital. I'm on my way. Lydia, wait, I started, but she had already hung up. I went back to Bernie and Grace just as the doctor arrived. Grace tightly held my hand the entire time the doctor examined her, but in the end, she didn't need stitches. Instead, they used some sort of medical adhesive and put a small bandage over the cut. I glanced at the clock and saw over half an hour had passed. Lydia must be in the waiting room by now. The nurse was giving us instructions and talking to Grace about being careful when the emergency room doors suddenly burst open. Car accident victim in critical condition, one of the paramedics called out as they wheeled in a gurney. The attending doctor rushed over. From where I sat, I could see it was a man. He had bandages over his forehead and an oxygen mask covering his face, but for some reason, I couldn't stop staring at him. I was fixated on his feet. He was wearing tennis shoes exactly like mine. That's strange, I thought as I stared at his shoes. My mind locked onto that fact, refusing to let me see anything else. In a moment of clarity, it hit me all at once. I realized that was my body they were bringing in. The sudden realization was too much for me, and everything went black. A burning sensation stung my nose, and my eyes snapped open. A nurse stood over me with smelling salts. Are you all right, ma'am? She asked. Ma'am? I said, confused, looking around and realizing I was in a hospital. Mommy? Grace's voice called out, and I saw Bernie holding her. I'm fine, I said, trying to collect myself. The nurse informed us that Dan, or rather Lydia, had been driving and lost control of the car in the rain. He had suffered a major head injury but was alive and in intensive care. We would know more tomorrow. I asked one of the paramedics where the accident had happened. On the way home, I asked Bernie to drive by the accident site. He didn't want Grace to see it, but since she had fallen asleep, he agreed. I saw my car had slid off the road and crashed into a tree. The driver's side window had a crack, probably from Lydia's head hitting it. There were no cops around, but I figured a tow truck would be out soon. I had Bernie stop, and before he could stop me, I jumped out of the car and ran over to inspect the wreckage. I needed to find the stone tablet. I knew it must have been damaged in the crash, but I had to see it for myself. The rain was still pouring, and I was soaked. I looked around the wreckage, and to my surprise, I found the tablet, still intact, lying on the passenger seat. I quickly grabbed it, wrapped it in a towel I found in the back seat, and hurried back to the car. Lydia, what's going on? What's that you have? Bernie asked, concerned. Grace was still sleeping soundly in her car seat. I'll explain when we get home, I said. The rest of the drive home was in silence. I kept trying to figure out what to tell Bernie when we got back to his house. The truth was too bizarre, but I couldn't come up with a believable lie. We pulled into the garage, and Bernie carried Grace inside to put her to bed. I quickly looked around and found a safe place to put the stone tablet. I suddenly realized how cold I was from the wet clothes and began stripping them off, hoping to find something dry before Bernie finished putting Grace to bed. I pulled off the shirt, letting it drop to the floor. In a flash, I unbuttoned and removed the pants. The bra was soaked too. For a moment, I hesitated but then remembered my body must be used to this. I unclasped the bra and took it off without hesitation. As I looked down at myself, I realized I was completely exposed, just as Bernie walked into the room. I had planned to change quickly, but with him here, I grabbed a blue silk robe from the closet and put it on. Lydia, what's going on? Bernie asked, looking at me with concern. I didn't know what to say. I slowly walked over and sat on the edge of the bed, staring up at him. I wanted to explain, but my words wouldn't come. I sat there in silence, looking up at him for what felt like forever. This isn't easy for me to say, and I'm sure you won't believe me, I finally said. What is it, Lydia? Bernie asked, sitting down next to me on the bed. I'm not Lydia. And that wasn't really Dan in the accident tonight. I mean, I'm Dan in Lydia's body, and she was in my body, I started, and then I broke down into sobs. She was in my body. What are you talking about? Bernie asked, looking confused. We switched bodies using this stone tablet my uncle left me. I know it sounds crazy, but you have to believe me, I explained. Bernie just stared at me, not saying a word. I told him everything, about the tablet, the letter from my uncle, the conversation with Lydia, and how we thought he and Grace would be gone today, so we planned to switch back later. I explained it all in detail, hoping he would understand. He didn't ask questions or say a word. He just sat there staring at me, as if trying to process everything. Finally, I finished speaking, and the silence stretched on. Bernie. I'm so sorry, I said, my voice breaking, and I started to cry again. In an instant, he grabbed me by the shoulders and shoved me back onto the bed. He was on top of me, straddling me, and I saw his fist coming toward me. I closed my eyes, bracing for the blow, but it never came. I opened my eyes and saw Bernie still straddling me, his hand in a fist, but his face softened, and a tear rolled down his cheek. Oh God, Lydia, he said, bringing his hands to his face, sobbing. He slowly got off of me and collapsed next to me on the bed, facing away from me, his whole body shaking with grief. I crawled over to him and put my hand on his shoulder, but he pulled it away. I lay down next to him and wrapped my arm around him. He tensed for a moment but then began crying again. I held him until he fell asleep. I think I know how I can fix this, I thought to myself as I held Bernie. At that moment, I made a decision. Although it frightened me, it was the only option I could think of. I may have dozed off at some point, but I didn't sleep long. I woke up before dawn, quickly dressing in a pair of jeans and a long-sleeve t-shirt. I didn't know where Lydia kept her bras, and it wasn't a priority, so I didn't bother. I went to the kitchen and started writing a letter. I began addressing it to Bernie but quickly crossed it out and started over. I wrote, "Words can't express how sorry I am for all the pain I've caused you. I never meant for any of this to happen, and I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. I believe that if I take the tablet to my body, and we both place our hands on it, we'll switch back, and Lydia will return to you. I'm not sure if it will work, but I have to try. No matter what it does to me, I need to restore Grace's mother to her. Grace needs her mother, and if it costs me my well-being, then it will be worth it. Again, Bernie, I am so sorry, and I hope you can forgive me. Dan." I grabbed the stone tablet from its hiding place and was about to head for the front door when I heard a voice. "Mommy?" Grace asked, her voice sleepy. "Grace, you need to go back to bed, sweetie," I said, walking her back to her room. I tucked her in and kissed her on the forehead. "Where are you going, Mommy?" she mumbled as she was drifting back to sleep. "Don't worry, Grace," I whispered softly. "Mommy will be home soon." I put on Lydia's coat, went out to the garage, and got into the car. I drove toward the hospital, arriving around 7:30. Once inside, I asked about Dan Miller's room. The nurse asked if I was family, so I said I was Dan's sister. I was told that my body was still in intensive care and no visitors were allowed. I pleaded with the nurse, hoping she could make an exception, but she couldn't. I was hoping to see the nurse who had been there the night before, thinking she might help, but she had already gone home. I found the ICU and planned to sneak in, locate my body, and use the tablet to switch us back. "Lydia!" I heard a voice call out, and I turned to see Bernie running toward me. "Bernie, what are you doing here?" I asked. "I can't let you do this," he said, his voice filled with concern. "What?" I was stunned by what he said. "I have to do this. It's the only way to get Grace her mother back. It's the only way to restore Lydia to you. What if you use that thing and instead of Lydia coming back, you end up trapped, and her body is left empty? Then Grace's mother will truly be gone," he said. "But I have to try," I said, desperate. "I just have to. Lydia. Dan, let's talk to the doctors. Let's find out what's going on with your body. Once we know more, we can decide." "Okay?" "Okay." We spoke with a doctor, who told us that my body had suffered a serious head injury in the crash and was now legally brain dead. I couldn't focus on anything else after that. Bernie later explained that my body was being kept alive artificially. "Where's Grace?" I asked as we walked back to the car. "Marcia owed you, I mean Lydia, a favor, so she's looking after her." We drove back to the house in silence, and for the first hour, neither of us said anything. "What am I going to do?" I finally asked, feeling guilty for even saying it. "I don't know," Bernie said, his eyes full of pain. "You can stay here. You can sleep on the bed, and I'll sleep on the couch." "No, I'll sleep on the couch," I said. The next few days were painful. Fortunately, Bernie's parents came to take Grace for the week. I don't think we could have shielded her from the pain we were both feeling. Both Bernie and I were in mourning. He had lost his wife, and I had lost my body. We both took the week off from work. I could see the hurt in Bernie's eyes every time he looked at me. I was a constant reminder of the woman he loved, and we had several heated arguments, both of us blaming each other. I had to face the reality that my body would soon be gone. I had left instructions with my mother that if something like this ever happened, I was to be taken off life support and my organs donated. I didn't know how I was going to handle the inevitable death of my body, and the guilt over what happened to Lydia kept me awake at night. I knew Bernie was struggling too because I could hear him up at night in the bedroom. Finally, on Wednesday night at 6:35, my body was taken off life support and pronounced dead. I went into the bedroom to tell Bernie, and we both broke down. We collapsed onto the bed, holding each other for hours. Exhausted, we lay in the dark, still clinging to each other. What happened next may be hard to believe, but I can only attribute it to the fact that my body was now gone, and I needed some kind of release. Both Bernie and I were hurting, and we needed to escape the pain, even if it was just for a moment. So that night, we made love. In that brief moment, we found some relief from our grief. 3 years later. Life didn't get any easier after that night. If anything, things got worse between Bernie and me. I struggled with the fact that I had been intimate with a man, and Bernie felt guilty, as if he had betrayed Lydia's memory. More and more, we slept apart, and when Grace returned home, she could sense something was wrong, but she didn't understand. In the end, she became a steadying force for both of us. We told Grace that I was sleeping on the couch because Daddy snored, but kids are perceptive, and she likely sensed that something more was going on. I had no choice but to continue doing Lydia's job at the daycare center. Finances were tight, and we couldn't afford for me to stop working. I enjoyed spending time with the kids, and of course, Grace was there the entire time. As the weeks went by, Bernie and I began relying on each other more and more. Initially, it was just about taking care of Grace, then helping each other around the house, and eventually, we started addressing the grief over Lydia's loss. Therapy wasn't an option, who would believe such a strange situation, so we leaned on each other. Once we got everything out in the open, we started to heal. Somewhere along the way, either out of desire or sheer loneliness, we developed a physical relationship. At first, it was difficult for both of us, each of us carrying our own guilt. But eventually, we couldn't keep our hands off each other. I stopped sleeping on the couch and stayed in the bed, wrapped in his arms. Slowly, we realized we had formed an emotional bond as well. It was fortunate that we did, because I soon discovered that, despite all our precautions, I was pregnant. 9 months later, Grace got a little brother, Stephen. Now I was a mother of both a daughter and a son. Taking care of 2 young children was a full-time job, but it was also incredibly rewarding. As time passed, I focused on caring for Grace and Stephen, while Bernie had his own needs, which I quickly learned to fulfill, just as he had already learned to fulfill mine. As for the stone tablet, we put it in the rafters of the attic. I had wanted to destroy it, would have happily smashed it with a sledgehammer, but Bernie wanted to keep it, perhaps as a memento of Lydia. I never wanted to see it again, let alone use it. It had forced me into Lydia's body, and after everything that happened, I decided to live out the rest of my life as Lydia. Eventually, Grace started 1st grade, and Stephen entered the terrible 2s. When we found the time, Bernie and I continued to enjoy a fulfilling intimate life. In many ways, I was different from the person I had been before, but in other ways, I remained the same. I don't think I'll ever fully overcome the guilt I feel for what happened to Lydia, but I'm learning to cope with it as best I can.